Welcome to First Things First. I'm Brooke Blunt. My pronouns are she and her.
I'm Maddie Mills. My pronouns are he and him. And before we get started, we'd like to acknowledge the custodians of the land on which we record. And for me today, that's the Gadigal People of the Eora Nation.
And for me, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Courtney Nation. Let's get into it.
All right.
We have Courtney in studio.
Courtney Act is here.
Yeah.
I'm even in high drag, which is more than we ever did for Brenda Call Me. So
I love this. Well, that's
Yeah.
the first question I said. Is it Shane or is it Courtney?
right, it's Courtney, and I will say I am in high drag, but I am wearing a wig with bangs, which to me is
So hot.
It's not quite drag. It's like, because it's like gluing on a lace front. It's a lot for early in the morning.
Totally.
I'm wearing Doc Martens and bangs, and it's as minimal effort, but still with maximum impact drag.
Well, it's more than Valentina when she wore the mask. Okay.
bless.
Saying,
Drag references. I love them.
well, we're so excited to have you in studio. I mean, it's been a little
Thank
while.
you.
How does it
It
feel to be
has.
back here at Nova?
It's so lovely. I miss it. I miss Brenda Call Me. We had so much fun. And I love podcasting. I love listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
And I love listening to like friends chatting on podcasts. And this week I kind of realized I have this weird relationship with podcasts. Like if I listen to you two, I'm like, oh, I know these two people.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I'm listening to like people that I know have a friendly conversation, and I know details about your lives and know you personally. And so
Yeah.
it's kind of, you get that intimate experience. And then I was like, I think that's just what everybody loves about listening to friendship podcasts.
Totally.
For me, it's like I get to keep up on your lives even when I don't get
When
to.
you're not in them.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then for other people, they're not in them at all. And so
Yes.
it's like this parasocial relationship. But then for me, I don't know, it was just a weird moment where I realized that all podcasts that I love are actually my friends talking to each other.
I love that. Well, Courtney, you've been on so many shows, you know, reality TV shows over the years. Currently, there's a global all-stars of Drag Race.
Yeah.
And the first...
Which was filmed in Colombia, where you just were.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
The first question that comes to mind was, why aren't you on it?
Why aren't I on it? You know what?
Or are you and you're not telling us?
The next season.
I just got back from Colombia.
Ooh.
No.
I was wondering why you look
That's
so
what
tanned.
Matt was doing.
That's what I was doing. You know what my drag name
You
would
guys
be?
both on a
What?
fucking TV show without me.
I have a drag name that somebody should scoop up, a First Nations drag queen, Indigenius.
Indigenous.
Indigenous.
Oh, yeah. Indigenous.
that's so good.
But that's good.
Why doesn't anyone have that? Like, come on, somebody take it.
It's yours.
It's yours, babe.
I'd be so bad
Start
at drag, trust me.
No,
I would be fucking
no,
terrible.
he's talking shit.
No,
Courtney.
I would.
He'd love
talking
it.
shit.
I would love it, but I would be bad. I've tried
Have
to
you
lip
seen
sync
his
and it's
ass?
terrible.
We don't have to lip sync. I'm a terrible lip syncer too. That's why I sing live.
There you go. And that would be even worse for me. But yeah, tell me about Global All Stars. Were you approached?
No, I've never been approached. I really loved being on Drag Race, and being there and filming it is like the most fun.
Yeah.
All of us adore Bianca, Darian, Ben, Milk, Laganja, Gia, April, all of these names that we know and love. Like, it was such a golden era of Drag Race. The personalities were amazing. It was fun to film it. But there's something about going back for me that is... Even going on Drag Race in the first place, I remember thinking, like, is this a good idea? Do I want to do this? Obviously now it was a really great idea. But there's a certain amount of control that you give over to sort of the editors to World of Wonder in telling
Yeah.
your story and your narrative. And
Yeah.
I feel that, like, I've gone back and watched Drag Race Season 6. At the time, it was like peak Twitter. I remember waking up every morning. There was like nuanced characterizations about me that was sort of portrayed on Drag Race that I didn't feel aligned with who I was, and I kind of got sucked into the comment section. Like, I'd wake up every morning, literally the first hour and the last hour of every day was scrolling the comments.
That's tough.
And then like replying to people, trying to like make them love me because they were like,
Yeah,
why were you mean to
convince.
Jocelyn Fox? Which really to 98% of people who have watched Drag Race is not even a memory or a consideration in their head anymore.
Yeah.
But it's those 2% of people who, I think what happened there is they saw like Jocelyn, who was like portrayed as like a fan of me and me being like rude or disrespectful to them. And it was sort of like this like weird hairline fracture of my core personality that like impacted how people, and like literally it doesn't matter now. Nobody
Yeah.
even thinks about it, but still there's like one comment on every post.
It stays with you though. Hey,
Yeah.
it really does. Like, I remember when I was filming The Bachelorette, or I think it was even The Bachelor, and they had these like forum rooms, and you would go on the forums. They were trying to sleuth. Basically, they were sleuthing for the answers of who ends up with the honey badger at the end. And I was the same. I used to go on them and
You were
find out
commenting
what-
like, can you imagine if someone left and just walked away from him?
guys. And they had like weird names like Bad Girl Kitty Me, or like something like it was
Or like
there
good
was all
Christian
these-
mum, but then calling you a whore.
But there was this one person that was just so good at sleuthing, like they just knew like all of the things that they would post were so accurate and were happening on the show. But they wrote this like comment and told me that I was like really boring and, you know, I wouldn't last, like all this, like just really nasty stuff. And it's like really stuck with me.
Clearly.
Just a comment
Yeah.
of being boring. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm okay with being fucking boring. Like I
Yeah.
don't try to be anything you know, and if I'm boring, like fine, people get along with me, but some people don't. And it sticks with you and you're like,
That has stuck with you because whenever someone says something about being boring, and I've seen your reaction, it's like it's a visceral thing where
visceral
you're like,
thing.
yeah. Oh, that's so
I don't
interesting.
know if, yeah.
I think post Drag Race, watching it back was almost this like reckoning for me, and like my disillusionment with my worldview at that time, where I went in with like this really like self-help, universe, law of attraction kind of like vibe, where I was like putting good things out there, and then what I perceived that I got back was something negative, and it kind of broke apart. I was like, wait, I was a good person. I did
Yeah.
everything right. Why am I
Yeah.
being punished?
Yeah.
In a weird, good way, it kind of set me free from that, where I was like, oh, actually in life, even if you're a good person, sometimes shit happens, and that's
Totally.
okay, and you just have to accept your reality as it is. But the thought to go back to Drag Race or All Stars or Global All Stars, it just feels like where I'm at in my career.
Surpasses it.
Well, yeah, no, it just feels
Totally.
like, it just feels like, personally, I think it would be so much fun.
Yeah.
But like, actually, there's almost like too much at risk to hand over everything to somebody else now.
Yeah.
I mean, you will, I'm sure you'll see me on another reality show somewhere soon because, you know, mama got to pay the bills. But I'd rather host a show or make documentaries
Yeah.
or do interviews or podcasts or chat shows or something like that.
Well, why the fuck is Michelle Visage hosting and not you? Come on.
You said it.
Like, I mean, if Brooklyn can do it in Canada,
Yeah.
you would be amazing.
But you know
is
what
there,
is
can I
weird?
ask a question? Is
Yeah.
there any rift between you and Rue?
I don't know. I mean, there's never been. I'm definitely on like the bad kids list. Like
From Mama Roo.
I'm off the Christmas card
Okay,
list.
yeah.
Although I did make it back on. There is a literal Christmas card list. I remember I wasn't on it for years, and then all of a sudden I got my World of Wonder like block of RuPaul chocolate Christmas card, and I was like, oh, I'm back on the Christmas card list.
Ooh.
But maybe I still am. Maybe I just moved and I didn't update my address.
I just think that you would have been a great host, and it would have been
Yeah.
such an amazing representation for our country as, you know, a drag queen who is, you know, known as like one of the pinnacle drag queens from Australia to host the series. I think it was a no-brainer, but
Yeah.
I mean, you've done more than Drag Race. You've done Dancing with the Stars.
I have.
Yeah.
You've done
How
Twice.
was that?
The
Can I
Masked
ask how
Singer.
that was?
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I want
Dancing
to know
with-
how dancing was.
I've been told,
amazing.
and this is testament to like anyone on Dancing with the Stars, but somebody told me, don't do Dancing with the Stars because it'll end your career. It obviously hasn't.
No. Why would it end your career?
I know, it's ridiculous. What a stupid slogan. I think it was someone from Channel 9. But tell me about, the experience there, and was it fun?
Dancing
Who
with
was your
the-
partner?
His name's Josh. We're still
Okay.
best friends. Josh Keefe.
Was he hot?
He's hot and lovely and amazing, and it's so much fun.
Yeah.
Like the thing that is fun about it is you are for 6 to 8 hours a day for 15 weeks.
Oh, is
Yeah.
it that long?
Season 1, because it's 12 episodes,
Wow.
12 weeks, and then
Okay.
I think we had
Rehearsals.
rehearsals.
Yeah.
I think it was 5 weeks of rehearsals. So what's that?
Yeah.
17 weeks.
That's a long time.
No time for anything else. And like,
Yeah.
when in life have you ever dedicated 8 hours a day 5 days a week to anything.
To anything, yeah.
True.
Like, if you love
people
dancing,
with jobs, I guess, but
9 to 5,
we don't know about
boring
that.
people. But like, yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, dancing though for that many hours a day must be grueling. Did you like have any mentee bees? Did you break down throughout the series?
No, my body kind of, there was a few things during Contemporary Week. I remember getting like a bruised rib or a cracked rib or something or rather. But physically, it was amazing. Like your fitness. Also, something that people never think about, ballroom dancing, it's basically like hugging someone. So you're dancing with them for like 8 hours a day. It's like being hugged for 8 hours. And there's something quite lovely and nourishing.
Oh, nice.
One of my love languages is touch. So I'm just like dancing with Josh each day, just like holding each other, dancing away.
Oh,
It's very
wow.
delightful.
Well, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Would you go on any new shows?
Like?
Would you write your own show?
Oh, I've been pitching Brooke.
Okay,
I did that
okay.
Channel 10 pilot
Guys.
season. We had Courtney's Closet. We made the pilot.
Oh,
It was
I love that.
very well received, but no, You know what I've realised? It's that thing with like every meeting that I go to. I was in the UK having meetings, in the US having meetings. Everybody says, oh, it's really tough right now.
Yeah.
Everybody's struggling. They want things that will definitely work.
Yep.
And so what I've realised, which has kind of been a theme of my career, is that sometimes rather than waiting for other people to say yes, you just go out and do it by yourself, which is where like YouTube, podcasting, these sorts of things are all really like of great tools to like young creatives or any creatives of any age. Like you can do things cheaply enough that you can get them online and just get the seed out there and start it going. So I went to the shop and I bought a whole bunch of new lights and things, and I've started sort of getting back on my YouTube train.
At home studio?
Just at home in my drag room, which is fun.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I feel like Courtney's Closet needs to be an actual legitimate like series, whether it's on YouTube or something.
Yeah.
I fucking love that episode with Luke.
Yeah, Luke.
Oh, and like Luke's now married to
Amy,
which is one of my friends who was on my season, and I'm like, fuck, that was just like so wholesome and so like people need to see that shit.
You know what?
I
That
agree.
day that we filmed,
so
and I haven't asked Luke this, but that day that we filmed, he was going on a date, like a first date. And in my mind, I've just decided that it was Amy. But I don't know if it was. But I just, for some reason, I want to be like part of the Inception story.
And you
When-
injected
when
him
was
with
it shot?
confidence.
Yeah, that's just called narcissism. But I'm like, yes.
In this business, we've all got a little bit of it. The show that I think of is Survivor. Would you do it?
Yeah.
As Courtney Act.
Oh my God, in drag. What you have to do, you get in drag on the first day.
And you stay.
Yeah, it's like going to Mardi Gras and like leaving Mardi Gras at 8 a.m. when the sun comes up and you're still in drag. You've been on the dance floor all night, like sweating, pashing people, and you're just like, your wig's slightly askew, your beard's poking through, your lipstick's all smudged, but you are still there. I feel like that should
That'd
be...
be fun. Or it's all drag queens, and it's like 12 drag queens, and they're not allowed to get out of
The
drag.
rule, that's it. We had this rule for the Diva Awards back in the day when we used to, party. The Diva Awards are on a Monday night, and the rule was nobody gets out of drag ever.
Okay.
So you would go out, and I remember one night or one day after the night, I remember turning to Vanity and I was like, oh, did you get out of drag? And she was like, no. And I was like, oh, I think you won. You didn't get out of, like, she physically didn't get out of drag. She'd just been in drag so long that, like, the drag left her. Like, it had, like, rubbed off.
He had gone home itself.
Yeah.
Oh, my life. I wanted to talk to you about, like, a recent thing that's in the media about the census.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And, obviously, it's been a conversation in the public. You were on the project, I think, talking about it. Why are you so passionate about pushing that?
Well, I think that, so the census, a survey that happens every 5 years in Australia to get sort of a snapshot of the Australian people and understanding who we are, where we live, and therefore how we can allocate resources and funds.
Totally.
And we kind of have these sort of ideas or percentages of like how many LGBTQ people there are in Australia, but often people who are our detractors are sort of like, well, we don't know this, there's no official information, or they're like, oh, you're too fringe or you're too niche, we're not going to bother with that, or we're not going to allocate resources because we don't actually know. And then the census is the perfect time to gather that data, but then, so the Labor government had agreed to include questions about sexuality and gender identity in the census, and then they sort of backpedaled and withdrew them.
Yeah.
And so, that just sucked because I think recording that data is really important. I think that having an understanding of where LGBTQ people are in Australia as well really helps because like we are like, okay, let's say there's 10% and like do we just distribute that evenly? Like actually are there more people in regional areas who need more help or more money, or is it all in the city? Because like people would have you believe that all queer people live in Oxford Street.
Of course.
And so having a better understanding I think is just really important. I think just from a fundamental level of visibility, every household in Australia, it sounds so weird and so like insignificant, but I think when you're a young queer person or any sort of minority who isn't used to seeing themselves, when all of a sudden you see yourself in an official document and you have the opportunity to sort of check that box. I remember actually Meghan Markle, she wrote an article about being mixed race, and she said that there was a box that was like white, black, like it was kind of like pretty rudimentary boxes. And she was like, oh, I don't know which box to tick because my mum is black and my dad is white.
Yeah.
And she said to the teacher, she's a little girl in school here. And she said that to the teacher, and the teacher was like, well, honey, you tick white because that's what you look like. And in that moment for her, there was like, but this is my mum. You want me to deny my
half
mother and half of who I am because of like trying to fit into the right box. And her dad told her, you draw your own box, like you. And there was something about the idea of like ticking those boxes and filling in those things that really helps us to feel seen and understood in who we are. And so I think for LGBTQ people, seeing ourselves on the census and other people seeing that question on the census is a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
I definitely think as First Nations people, we've had to tick a box majority of our lives. You know, that whole idea of are you First Nations, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander? That's what it was worded as. Or Australian, you know, there was always like, there was a difference. I never thought of it as denying a part of myself because my mum is white, but I can understand where she's coming from when she spoke about that. But I think the census is obviously crucial, including that. They've gone back on it right now.
Yeah.
So they're going to include it.
They went back first with the sexuality question and said, yes, we will ask people about their sexuality.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like, oh, that's a good step in the right direction. And then we can sort of continue the pressure. People signed a petition. Equality Australia did a lot of amazing work. And then they announced that they would be including questions about gender as well, which is great. So we just have more data. The questions about intersex characteristics aren't included, but those weren't a part of the sort of agreed questions. And so that is something that is still to be worked on for the future. But I think having gender and sexuality included in the census is just a great thing.
Well,
I agree.
I think, you know, there's 3% of the population that is First Nation, and that's just 1 million people. So in my mind, there is way more than 1 million homos out there.
Right?
I agree.
I wanted to talk to you about, like, it's a little bit left of field, but I wanted to talk to you about, recently you spoke about, like, exploring your masculinity and that side of things. Is that something that you've, like, recently discovering more of, or is it, like, something that you're prioritizing more of? Why is it suddenly, you know, popped up for you?
Well, I think masculinity was always something that I pushed against. I always thought that I wasn't masculine enough. And so there was sort of like a shame about that. And then sort of turning 18, coming out, still didn't feel like I was masculine enough, but then found that drag was an opportunity for me to express femininity in like a compartmentalized way.
Yeah.
But then as a boy, despite not being masculine, would still always try to be more masculine and always felt like I was either performing masculinity and I was failing at that.
Yeah.
So I think as I've gotten older and I've become more comfortable with the femininity and the masculinity, I've realized that, like, even just straight culture, and if I put masculinity and like heteronormative things all in one box, I was always just like, ew. And I think now that I'm more comfortable in who I am, I don't feel threatened by those things. And so I'm interested in kind of exploring what masculinity means for me. And I think rather than trying to be masculine or perform masculinity or having shame about that, I'm just like, oh, well, who am I? And just kind of like embracing all the parts of me, whether that's feminine or masculine.
I love that. Is there anyone that you're inspired by that does that you can see that does it well?
Well, that's the thing that I find really interesting. I'm actually doing a talk, a panel at South by Southwest about masculinity. Nice. And the idea, I think the title that I'm working with is something about positive role models, masculinity, positive role models, because there's lots of toxic masculinity role models, like your Andrew Tates and your Joe Rogans and Jordan Peterson sort of advocates for a lot of that sort of stuff. And I think all of these young men, particularly straight men, are finding a message in those people. And I think a lot of that messaging can be toxic. So I'm like, masculinity isn't bad, but toxic masculinity is bad. And I think that sort of the fragile parts of masculinity like to misrepresent those conversations and say like, oh, you're not allowed to be a man anymore, and oh, masculinity is toxic. And it's like, no, masculinity is not toxic. Toxic masculinity is toxic. Yeah. And what is positive masculinity, and therefore who are the role models? And I think I've been doing lots of research. I was listening to like men's podcasts. And,
oh God, how was that?
Oh, it was so horrible. It was actually so horrible.
Your ears bleeding.
Yes. And like listening and watching documentaries and trying to like listen to like those folks on that side of the fence. And I realized that a lot of the content was about role modeling and that they were just giving young men a sense of belonging and a sense of community, like maybe what we find in the queer community or like watching Drag Race or like whatever it is they are finding in listening to these podcasts. And it was like
being a part of something.
Yeah, like it was like a big brother. Like as in like to be a brother to someone. It was like, here's how to get your hair cut. Yeah. And here's how to like, everybody looks good with a fade. And these are different types of hair products. And it was like beauty influencers for blokes almost. And I just realized that, a lot of young men are just looking for role models. And so I know that I'm not a person that young straight blokes are going to listen to about masculinity, but perhaps as someone who had a complicated relationship to gender growing up and is sort of exploring those topics, that maybe I'm now looking for, well, who are the positive masculinity role models? So that's sort of what the South by Southwest talk will be all about.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. It's amazing.
It's such a nuanced conversation too, because like I think our experience as queer men is different to those who identify as straight. And I think that like sometimes I in the past have definitely had battles in my own mind about how to be feminine or to allow my feminine side, because I'm quite a feminine man naturally, and then I have this other masculine side that sometimes is a bit of a facade when I'm in a room full of other men, that I feel like I need to bring to the table to be accepted. And
it gets all real straight Maddie.
I mean, it's a weird. It is. It's a weird thing that happens for me, especially when, in this business of TV, it's like going in, I call them pink dicks, and you're talking to, white, straight, elderly men about roles and jobs. And my pink dick syndrome all of a sudden drops in, and I'm this straight, masculine identity in this room. And I'm like, that's not me, know? There's a force there that makes me feel like that. But yeah, I love that. Where is the conversation at, and how can we be a part of it?
It's at the ICC. It's part of South by Southwest, which I guess if you Google...
Yeah, they'll be online.
Yeah. South by Southwest very good job promoting this.
Have you ever done a TED Talk, Courtney?
I haven't, and I've been asked, and I've thought about it, and I always try and work out what my TED Talk would be. And I definitely think it would be about gender and sexuality and masculinity. So I feel like maybe the South by Southwest talk is like dipping my toe in the water. It's a panel with some other speakers.
Great.
I don't know. I'm always thinking about how do you be effective rather than how do you be right. I think it's easy to get up on my soapbox and point a finger. But I mean, even last night I was at the Ensemble, the Ensemble Theatre in
Kirribilli?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. I was like over the other side of the bridge.
Yeah, the other way.
And I was watching a play, and the audience there are not even predominantly, like 100% like retirees, white, silver hair. And yeah, like a very older audience who I presume are all of a similar lived experience, interested in similar things. And the play that we were watching, The Queen's Nanny, it was just a few, it was the word colonizer was said twice in jest. And I thought that word is probably a trigger for people in this room. Now, they're of a part of that generation and sort of like a part of that narrative. But I could imagine that like, or comments on like masculinity or like male privilege. Yeah. I can imagine both of those topics in that room would get a groan or an eyeball roll.
Yep.
And I always think like, and they were so subtly used and it wasn't like aggressive or finger pointy or finger waggy. But I thought, how do you get people to incrementally like change their opinions? Like how do you what's the saying about like hiding the vegetables in the dessert or the meat or
the meatloaf?
I don't know, something. But like we're all on board and we're like making art and commentary, which sometimes can be a bit almost like not self-congratulatory, but like if you're already in the circle, then how do we get to the Coldplay fans?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know? I feel
Yeah.
that because what happens is when I talk about representation and mainstream representation, sometimes it's an echo chamber because I'm talking to mob.
Yeah.
Or I'm on NITV. You know, it's like I'm preaching to the converted.
We're already
How do you
converted,
go out?
yeah.
How do you go outside of that box? It is like a task for people who want to make change, but I think there are ways to do it, and I think art is.
Yeah, I think art is one of them. The thing that I come back to when I sit there and I think about it and I think about like what I would want to say if I was I used to have this thing when I lived in the UK if I was ever on like Piers Morgan's show because I got asked to go on it a bunch but I always said no.
Okay.
And so I'd always have these imaginary conversations in my head.
Yep.
And I'd always get
The
to the
shower
end.
arguments.
Yeah.
I always do that.
Yeah. And I always got to the end and I was like, the reason that you're saying no is because there's actually no point in engaging these people on their line of questioning. And the best way forward is through positive storytelling. It's through role modeling, having positive storytelling that platforms like LGBTQ people, First Nations people, empowering stories for women that aren't almost like they're not reactionary to the patriarchal gaze where it's just like people thriving and being themselves and then the people watching sort of seeing the shared humanity in that.
Yeah, it's living in
Yeah.
a way that you want to see the world, right?
Yeah. The funny thing is it doesn't feel like you're doing anything.
Yeah.
When you're like arguing with somebody and telling them why
Lot of
they're
energy
wrong,
there, yeah.
you feel really like, oh, I've really done the work today.
Totally.
And just like
Yeah.
having fun and living your life and telling wonderful stories about your community.
Yeah.
It almost doesn't feel like you've done anything.
Yeah.
But I actually think in a weird way, in the long term, I feel like that does more because
It's like droplets in a ocean or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
Dan says, like it's just a ripple, like
Yeah.
it just starts to filter out.
it does. It sometimes doesn't feel like it's happening fast enough, but I think that it's just telling more positive stories and like doing that positive role modeling is really the thing that changes.
And I love when you have a plethora of like people in a community. You need your extremists.
Yes.
You need
Yes.
people who are loud. Like, I think of Lydia in our community. I'm like, I don't agree with everything you say, but gee, you make some noise.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
we need those people and we need the people who are just doing the
Yeah.
day-to-day sort of
Well, it's like you
behind
need
the
to have a
scenes.
shit day to have a good day. Like you need the days to fucking have them so you appreciate the good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think those extreme views and those people who are like further, like we probably follow like people who are a lot more radical than I do. And I agree with a lot of the things they
Yeah.
say. And I feel inspired by those people. And I
Totally.
take part of their message. And then I think of myself here
Yeah.
sort of closer to the middle
Yeah.
and being like, all right, how do I they're pushing the boundary further that way, which creates more space in the middle for me. How do I then also sort of listen to what they're saying and incorporate some of their messaging in ways that people who I talk to might understand?
Well, I think over the years, I've seen that you've been, a great ally to First Nation people.
Yeah.
It started way back on RuPaul's Drag Race. Let's do a full circle moment.
With
when
my
you were
flag that was the correct way around.
the correct way around. You were the first to bring, our flag to an international, stage. And I think from that moment throughout your career, you've always championed First Nations voices. What is it about using your platform to do that, not just for First Nations, but people outside of your own lived experience? Why is that really important for you?
I think that as a queer person, I have come to understand, probably through my own healing or as I've understood myself more. Actually, Brene Brown has a quote that's like, empathy cannot exist where shame does. And so when I was younger and had shame about my identity, I probably wasn't being very good at being empathetic to anybody with a struggle different to my own. Yep. And I think that's why, particularly in the gay male community, the white gay male community, we have sort of seen sexual racism and things like that play such a part. And whilst we are part of a minority, we often aren't able to reach across the aisle and be allies to other people. Yeah. White gay men can particularly sort of reinforce some of those negative ideas. Sometimes, hashtag not all white gay men. And so I think that as I kind of healed my shame, I then saw that there was intersections of being queer that were... There was a shared experience. And that's what I love about being queer is I was like, oh, queer First Nations people, we share our queerness. And there's something about our shared queer identity that helps me understand other people's experiences. And then I'm able to sort of use that as an empathetic connection to someone's experience who I don't understand, I can't understand, but I listen and I believe and I see that other people's allyship was important in me getting the liberation that I now have, and therefore I can be a part in being a good ally to other people, particularly First Nations people here in Australia.
Yeah, I love to see it, and I think, you obviously continue to do that, so thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
We appreciate it, but thank you so much for coming on our pod. It's cool to have you back in the country. It's nice to see you again. I mean, what is happening in the future for you? What's the next thing for you before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'm excited because I'm going up to Brisbane, my hometown, for the Melt Festival, which is this open access queer arts festival. It goes for 3 weeks. It basically means anybody is welcome to put in a show, but it's a festival of queer art, culture happening in Brisbane from
October 23rd.
Yes.
There we go.
For 3 weeks.
Yep.
There's so many events. There's the people that I know and love, Hans is doing a show and Mark Trevorrow's doing a show.
Okay.
But there's plenty of other really great shows. And it's culminating with a River Pride Parade.
Oh,
so
Slay.
the
Amazing.
Mardi Gras hop happens on the street. In Brisbane, they're doing a Pride Parade on the Brisbane
boats?
River, on boats.
like the Olympics. It's the gay Olympics.
It's the gay, but hopefully with less complaints and less rain.
Yeah, and less naff. It was
Less
a little
naff.
bit
It was a bit
boring,
naff,
wasn't it?
wasn't it? Yeah.
I hope Lady Gaga's flying in to perform.
No, I am.
You are. There you
I
go.
am. I'm currently getting the dress made. I'm like, how many
Ooh.
meters of bellowing chiffon is safe
it.
to have flowing off the end of a ship?
At least 5.
At least 5. But yeah, if you're in Brisbane or if you're in that area, look up the Melt Festival because there's so many fun, queer, cabaret, theatre, music. Spencer Tunick as well. If you've
Okay.
ever wanted to get naked on the Story Bridge.
Ever wanted to get naked in general?
In general, you can be photographed by Spencer Tunick as a part of one of those if you don't know who Spencer Tunick is, he does those photos where thousands of people get naked in a
did one
public
at Bondi
space.
Beach recently.
Yeah.
I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. I'm I just think I'm too much of a grower, not a shower.
I never knew. Same.
I'm it just wouldn't be my
Same,
vibe.
yes, guys. I am the same.
I can do it taped. But then I feel like I'm cheating. I feel like the
Yeah.
whole point is about liberation,
Yeah.
but maybe it's about baby steps.
I do want to say, Brisbane is a good place to have a good time.
Yeah.
So October 23rd.
Yeah,
Go
all the
up
way
there.
through next 3 weeks.
We'll probably pop it in the show notes.
Yeah.
So people can get tickets.
Do that. And then the River Pride Parade is on that final Saturday, the 9th of November.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
I'll be in Sydney.
Oh, Brooke, should we fly in for it? Go for the River Parade.
Come on
Let's
up.
get on a boat.
Yeah.
Fuck
We'll
it.
speak to Harry
What do they
Kay.
call it? The Brown Snake.
The Brown Snake is
what
the,
they
the
call it?
Brisbane River.
Brown, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Courtney Act, for coming on.
Lovely to
Love
see
having-
you both. Lovely to talk to you both.